Yes, that was.
All right, welcome to Ignite. Let's stand up and sing.
Now that is
breathing deep, the sweetest scent of spring. I've been silenced by the stars. I've been lost in melody that made me lose. Oh, how great thou art. You are Lord, you are Lord, you are all of this and more. More than a fleeting touch, more than just flash, more than a mystery. You're all of this and more. More than a promise kept, more than a life and death, more than a miracle. You're all of this and you have whispered inside me all you know. Took my breath away. You have opened wide the lovely eyes of such amazing grace. You are Lord, you are Lord, you are who all this is for. You are Lord, you are Lord, you are all of this and more. More than a fleeting just flash, more than a mystery. You're all of this and more than a promise kept, more than a life and a miracle. You're all of this and all of this, and it's never enough to say I need you more than anything else. 'Cause I need you like the fire needs the air to feel alive. More than a fleeting touch, more than just flashing blood, more than a mystery. You're all of this and more than a promise kept, more than a life and death, more than a miracle. You're all of this and all of this and Bible with me this evening. Turn to Romans chapter 14. What I want to do, because last week, if you were here, the meeting that was on the whole time before. It's full battery.
Got it? Okay. All right. Awesome. Romans 14. So, yes. Last week we did this little thing where we cut out our handprints and we pinned them to our back, and then we walked around and wrote stuff on. Well, that took a long time, much longer than I anticipated. And so I didn't actually get to finish everything that I wanted to say in that message. And it was important. There were a couple of important things that I want to say. So this is a bit of a review, and then we'll jump right into some new stuff, because we're in our series on the one another's of the Bible. And so last week we talked about encouraging one another. And that's a really good place to start, because who doesn't love to be encouraged? And so now, actually it was accepting one another was the way it was worded, but there's similar concepts. And in this idea of accepting one another, we didn't get a chance to look at Romans 14 because of the time, but I want to just hit a couple of things in this. And I think that there are two things that we need to watch out for when it comes to not accepting one another or failing to be welcoming. How do we fail to be welcoming? Well, one way is to be judgmental. All right, that's one way. And in Romans chapter 14, it tells us some things that are really important. For example, in verse 1, it says, don't quarrel over opinions. In verse 7, it says, none of us lives to himself. None of them dies to ourselves. We belong to the 10. Why do you pass judgment on your brother or sister by inference there? Why do you despise your brother? We will all stand before the judgment seat of God. So, we're going to give account for any judgments that we pass on people that are sinful. It's important for us to avoid being judgmental. The second way we can fail to be welcoming is by playing favorites. And there's a passage that Paul uses in Corinthians where he's actually telling the people, look, you're showing favoritism. People come into your meetings and they're wearing fine clothes. They will go to the back so that they can have that seat. They were showing favoritism to people that were wealthy people. Now, we show favoritism in a lot of ways ourselves, don't we? It could be people from the same school. People could be the same, interests that we have. We do play favorites even amongst our friend groups, maybe the town we live in. There's an old saying, they don't associate with people from the other side of the railroad tracks, or whatever it is that, those people over there, or whatever it is that, those people over there, we don't associate to them. Republicans don't associate with Democrats, or whatever it is. And there's a lot of, and when we do that, there's a lack of acceptance that people feel. And that's something that the Bible tells us to avoid. One of the one another's is accepting one another, and it's really important that we avoid being judgmental and playing favorites. Now, that was last week, all right? But today we're going to learn about another one that may at first sound contradictory to last week's instruction. And that's, if you flip your page, Romans chapter 15, look at verse 14. It says this, I myself am satisfied about you, my brothers, that you yourselves are full of goodness, filled with all knowledge, and able to instruct one another. Now, the word there for instruct in the original language is a kind of a comprehensive term for counseling. Not just, teacher stands up in front of the classroom and, says, okay, class, listen up. This is the lesson for today, blah, blah, blah. And then you get out your books and you do your lesson, and then you pack up your books when the bell rings. And that's what we normally think of when we think of instruction. But in the Bible, the word that's used here is all kinds of passing on of knowledge from one person to another. All right? And that often comes in the form of telling that they or want to hear. And we would use the word admonish today for that kind of thing. So it's got these ideas in it: encouraging, warning, and advising, all lumped together in this term called admonishing. And in some of your translations, you might actually have that word if you have a different translation with you this evening. But now, do you see why it might be hard to see how this one another fits with last week's one another to be accepting? Do people feel accepted when they're being admonished? Have you ever been admonished? Somebody says to you some truth that maybe you weren't quite ready or interested in hearing, but you needed to hear it, and you kind of felt nasty afterwards, felt bad, low about it. I've got a slide here. This might be you. This might be what you're thinking of when you think of admonishing people, like a screaming fight or something along those lines. But that's not at all what the Bible has to say. Next slide. All right. So in this picture, we see, I'm assuming it's like an adult talking to a teenager. Did you see the look on his face? That's kind of the look that I give people when they're admonishing me. It's not a look of pure joy. This isn't the kind of one another that inspires a lot of happiness. When I was starting out in youth ministry, it was back in the late 90s, I was in a church in Pennsylvania, and I was given a task. And the task was to paint of a building that was annexed to the main church building. It was this rundown house, and the walls in the basement were made out of like this rock. It wasn't even cinder block, and it was smelly like mold, and there was dirt everywhere. It was a miserable place. There was very little light. And they gave me some buckets of white paint and said, go down and paint that. I didn't sign up for that. At least that's what I was thinking. And you ever have those thoughts that you're kind of upset about something, so it's out almost involuntarily? Well, I came up, to grab my sandwich for lunch, and right above me in that same building, that same house, was a lady by the name of Gail. And Gail was a volunteer. And Gail helped out in the office, and she was a wonderful lady. And I was grumbling about the thing that I was doing, and I was making a scene. Well, one of the main secretaries of the church, her name was Diane, she overheard the things that I was saying to Gail, but I wasn't really saying them to her. I was just saying them in her, how sometimes you just say stuff out loud, and you don't care who's around, and you're just not speaking to anybody. You're just kind of, blasting the skies with these things. Well, she overheard that, and so I went back downstairs, these rickety stairs, down into this little dungeon that I was working in, and she followed me down the stairs. And she came to admonish me, and she told me that it was inappropriate for somebody who was in ministry to grumble to employees or volunteers about things that were going on in the church. Guess how I reacted? Do you think I said, oh, you know what, you're so right. Thank you for coming down and telling me that. I am so appreciative to you. Can I buy you lunch? It wasn't like that at all. In fact, I said nothing in response. I don't know what my face looked like, but it wasn't like this. And when she went back up the stairs, I was fuming. They're painting with getting that stuff all over, and I was miserable. And that just stewed inside of me for the rest of the afternoon. I went home afterwards, and on the way home, I don't know what it was. I couldn't tell you to this day, but something inside of me just kind of melted a little, and I decided, you know what? As much as I don't want to admit it, she was right. So I came in the next day, and I apologized to Gail. And I don't know whether Diane overheard that or not, but and I never thanked her for admonishing me that day. She probably thought I hated her for quite a while. But I appreciated, ultimately, what she did because she taught me a valuable lesson. And I believe, because there are many people that didn't learn that lesson that are no longer in ministry. And because I learned that lesson from somebody who's willing to tell me, to admonish me, I might be here today because, in part, of what she said to me that day. And as I look back on that experience, I see some things, some qualities about Diane that are mirrored in this verse. Look at the verse again. It says that you are full of goodness. You know, Diane was she wasn't perfect. She was full of goodness, but everyone knew in the church how devoted she was to her job. She worked long hours. She cared for her husband, who had cancer at the time and has since passed away. I mean, she was the real deal. And you know how sometimes when somebody says something to you and you feel like you're getting whacked by the plank that's in their eye, feeling like they're trying to take the speck out of yours? Well, this wasn't Diane. She wasn't that kind of person. She was definitely not a hypocrite. She was full of goodness. I knew that. And so it made it easier to swallow coming from her. And the second thing is that it says here, that filled with knowledge. Diane knew her stuff. She was no novice at this. She wasn't a newbie at it. She had wisdom from experience, and she had a thorough knowledge of God's word. She was the kind of person that other people, even older than herself, would go to for counsel about the difficult things that they were going through. So she knew her Bible. She was full of wisdom and knowledge. And so that was another characteristic of hers. And then ultimately, I was able to accept her words because I knew that she actually did care about me. She loved me. Other conversations, better moment, revealed that the things that she had done, bent over backwards to help me get used to being there at that church. She covered for me sometimes when I forgot to do some things, and she helped me through. And so I really knew that she cared about me. It wasn't like I was a stranger to her, and she just spouted off some things to me that strangers often do. In 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 14, Paul says this: I don't write these things to make you ashamed, but admonish you as my beloved children. So my life is better because of Diane and others that have been like her, especially my parents. They love me too much to let me sit back, or for them to sit back and just watch me walk after cliff and destroy my life going down the wrong paths. They put up the warning signs. They were the ones that confronted me when things needed to be said. And I didn't, to my shame, I didn't respond as well as I could in many of those situations. And it's hard to do that. But we're called to accept one another, yes. But we're also called, both of those concepts are true. They're essential. We got to have them. It's like Paul says, he says, we need to have the truth. Right? That's the kind of the admonishing thing. It sets us free. But we also need to have love. Right? Speak the truth in love. That's what Paul said. No better place in the Bible can I point to than John chapter 8 to combine these essential ideas into one story. And you might be familiar with this one. This is the story of the woman that was caught in adultery, and it is such a powerful, powerful story. Because I read to you parts of it. for the sake of time, we actually have the time, so I'm just gonna go ahead and read to you. It says that verse 1. Jesus went early in the morning. He came again to the temple, and all the people came to him, and he sat down and taught them. And the scribes and the Pharisees, they were placing her in the midst. And sometimes the Bible will say things in abbreviated ways, and you have to kind of think about how that would have happened. You imagine being her. She gets dragged out. She gets publicly humiliated. And they probably didn't give her a chair to sit on in front of all of them and said, "Here, why don't you sit here while we talk about you?" Because they, in their mind, they were thinking all about the law, which said that if anybody is caught in adultery like this, that the punishment is to stone them to death. So if we're going to stone her to death anyway, why treat her well? So they probably beat her up somewhat and threw her down in front of Jesus, and there she is on the ground in disgrace. And they said to him, "Teacher, this woman has been caught in the act of adultery." Remember, all the people are gathered around. This is the ultimate humiliation. And now in the law of Moses, what do you say? And then this they said to test him, that they might have some charge to bring against him. And Jesus then, I would say very unexpectedly, began to write in this on the ground. His finger. Scholars for years have tried to figure out what it is that Jesus might have been writing in the sand. There have been some good suggestions, but nobody really knows for sure. He may have been doodling. I don't know. He might have written a symbol that they might have all recognized. It might have been the beginnings of a Bible verse that would have been familiar to all of them. We don't know. But it would have seemed to them like he was ignoring them, because it says that they continued to ask him. They're kind of badgering him about this. It's like, Jesus, do you hear us? Do you understand what we're saying to you? Are you going to respond? Hello? And he's just writing there on the sand, looking down. And the woman, we're not sure exactly where she was in proximity to him. Then it says that he stood up and he said to them, I was a little startled. Oh, okay. I'm going to check to make sure this top here is on tight, because we don't want that happening again. You know, that happened right at the wrong moment. I was getting to the good stuff. All right, hopefully that's the end of that. No promises. I secretly told Jake to do that to keep you awake. I did not. All right. So, again, using your imagination. You're the woman there that's been humiliated, probably in pain, embarrassed beyond belief. And Jesus stands up. What do you expect to happen next? For him to join, for him to pick up the first stone? I mean, he's a rabbi, right? Are all the rabbis the same? Instead, he says this, "Let him who is without sin among you be the first to throw a stone at her." And then once more he bent down and wrote on the ground. And then it says something very interesting. It says that when they heard it, they went away one by one, beginning with the older ones. And Jesus was left alone with the woman standing before him. It doesn't say they said anything. It doesn't say that they tried to reply or argue with him. And it says that the older ones left first. I've thought about that a lot. And I'm curious as to why John decided to include that detail and left out so many of the others. And in that culture, they considered people with gray hair to be the wise ones. It was a crown of honor. And, when you started getting gray hair, you were, you got more status. And so some people have thought, oh, well, maybe they were, maybe it's just the younger ones were waiting to see what the older ones were doing. And they followed their lead. It's like, okay. There's another interpretation that the people offer about this, and that is that have had longer to live, and they're more aware of their past. One of the characteristics of youth is idealism. You've ever heard that, youthful idealism? It's a concept that, and it's not necessarily a bad concept. It's what drives young people to go out and change the world. It's this idea that, we can make a difference, and we're going to do this, and we go out and we have this optimistic idea, look, and we can change the world and make a better place, and all your young energy you put into doing that, and that's a good thing. And over time, what happens to people is that we kind of lose that youthful idealism, and it's replaced more with when it's good, it may be more down to earth, maybe a little more realistic, but a lot of times it can become cynical too. And who knows where these guys were in all of this. But what I wanted to say about this in relation to young people is that I want you to be careful to not be last to leave a storming party. Don't be that person. Don't be the last one to put down your verbal weapons, to expect perfection from other people when you don't have it yourself. What Jesus was pointing out to them was their hypocrisy. And for whatever reason, the youngest ones held on to it a little bit longer. And that's not to say that it's a characteristic, but it points out to us that some people have the ability to see their own imperfections better than other people do. And some people are really blind to when they have sin and want to cast stones. And you have probably been wounded by stones from hypocrites yourself. That happens to everybody at some point. And it hurts really bad. Whether you are caught in some issue, or like this woman in adultery, or whether it's something completely unfair and unfounded, it hurts nonetheless. And we feel very angry about it, honestly. And so Jesus carries out the first one another, or the second one, right? To admonish them to accept her, right? And it says in verse 8, or verse 9, Jesus stood up after they had all left, and he was alone with her again. "Woman, where are they? Has no one condemned you?" And she said, "No one, Lord." And he said, "Neither do I condemn you." Isn't that wonderful? Jesus accepted her. Not for being perfect, not for having a good reputation, not for being the rich person who would get the front seat, not for going to the right school, wearing the right clothes, or having the right personality, or any of or the right skin color, whatever it was. None of that mattered to him in this situation. All he saw was someone who was in need of acceptance and grace, and he offered that to her. But then he said one final thing: "Go, and from now on, sin no more." And there we have a gentle, loving bit of admonishment. She felt loved. She felt accepted. She felt defended in her helplessness. And Jesus gave all of that to her. She didn't deserve it, perhaps, but he gave it to her anyway. But he didn't say to her, "Now, hey, whatever you want to do with your life is fine by me, you do you, and I'm good with whatever." Jesus did not say that. And hopefully your parents never do that. And hopefully the people in your friend group don't feel that way about you, and you don't treat each other that way. If you have that mentality, you do you, live and let live, in your friend group, and you go to each other for advice, you're going to end up in horrible places. You need people in your life that love you enough, that have knowledge enough, and have the goodness enough to say, "Hey, go and sin no more. I'm not perfect, but I've seen this in your life. And if I didn't say something, I really wouldn't be your friend. I really wouldn't be your parent. I really wouldn't care about you." And Jesus did that with the woman there. Go and leave your life with sin. He's basically saying to her, "Look, I'm not condemning you. Here's a blank slate. You choose what you're going to do with it. But I'm telling you, you've got a second chance. Don't mess it up." And that's a beautiful, beautiful marrying of these two ideas, the admonishing with the accepting. And that's what we need to be for each other. So, is there somebody in your life that you respect, that has the ability, that you've given permission to speak truth into your life? And understand that if that's true, there is somebody like that in your life, you've built that into your life, that's a precious resource. Don't scare that person away. And don't make them sorry for getting up the courage to say things to you. Whether it's your parents, whether it's a friend, or a coworker, or a teammate, thank them for having the courage to do that. In every church youth group, there needs to be students that step up and lead. Peer leadership is a powerful, powerful thing. As a coach, I can say certain things that will carry a certain amount of weight. It comes from a different perspective. But when a peer, when a teammate, maybe a team captain, says something and calls the rest of the team to step up, it means something different. It's accepted on a different level. When I was playing college soccer, there was a kid on our team named Tommy Dull. And he was anything but dull. He ended up going on to become a Green Beret. So he was a legit guy. Like he was tough as nails. He was super athletic. And he had a lot of leadership just oozing out of him. He was a senior captain on the team. And one day, I was late for practice. And he let me know about it. He's like, you can't do that. You cannot do that. And my initial reaction was like, because I'm so good at accepting admonishment. He said that, and I was like, who are you to tell me what to do? Now, I didn't say that out loud, but that's the way I felt. Until I thought about it a little bit more after he had gone back to doing the stretches and stuff that we were doing. And he didn't call me out in front of the team. He did it off to the side, which I really appreciated. And then I thought, you know what? He's got just as many things going on in his life, and he's got just as heavy a course load, and he's even working on the side, and he's playing soccer, and he makes it on time every day. Why can't I? And my point in that is that because he walked the walk, when he talked the talk, I listen. And a lot of people have freedom, wherever that comes from, to admonish without being able to walk the walk. And if people do that to you, you don't like it. So think about the way you use language like this in your conversations. I don't want you to go away from tonight and just thinking, okay, Pastor Jason wants us to go admonish people. So I am going to go, first of all, to my siblings at home, and I'm going to admonish them about the things that I see that are going on in their life. I love them, and I'm just going to go do it. And that would be a horrible application of what we're talking about tonight. Because I think that anything that you tell people, and by way of admonishing, should be kind of bathed in prayer. It should be thought through carefully, and you should do it with humility, with grace, and in the spirit of being at least equals, not higher than them or anything like that, but somebody who cares about their well-being. And think about how you would receive it if it was you in the other position, coming from you. You know, do I have enough chops to be saying this right now, right? If you're shushing somebody in class when you're known to be a chatterbox, that's kind of hypocritical. Don't do it. If you're playing a sport and you miss practice every other practice and you chide somebody else for being late, that's a little bit outside the reasonable norm. We shouldn't be doing that kind of admonishing. But remember that you may be in a position to step in the gap for somebody, one of your friends, somebody you know, that can change the course of their life for the better, like Diane did for me. So let's be people that seek to admonish one another out of love. All right, we've got one final song we're going to sing tonight, and then you guys are out of here, and it's a lot to chew on, and be careful with the words that I've said tonight. All right? Okay, so we're going to sing a hymn, because I think the picture of Jesus accepting and rescuing, basically, the woman caught in adultery is just a beautiful picture of the gospel. So we want to sing about that as we close. Let's stand.
Jesus paid it all.
gives such a of how to live, how to be in relationships, to show love, to speak the truth, even when it won't be received well. Taste what an example. Thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You are dismissed.